Coming home. Mashyach. Messiah. 10. A child is born. Providing an eternal witness. Now that we have come this far, let's go back to the prophecy that initially opened our eyes to Dowd's role in Yahowah's plans. We last translated Yashayah Isaiah 9 in Observations, Volume 4, which son is this. That review was transformational in our quest to know and understand Yahowah. In retrospect, given the perspective we gained by studying the Mizmor, I suspect that we will be further enlightened and emboldened as we approach it once again. To our credit, even back then we realized that Isaiah 9 verse 6 and 7 could be easily misconstrued if taken out of the context provided by Yashayah Isaiah 8. Therefore, while you will find an amplified presentation of Yashayah 8 to 1-22 in Volume 4, Chapter 2, of Observations, here it is in summary form for your consideration. What follows is simply breathtaking in its scope and implications as it paints a picture of our yesterdays and tomorrows. Yahowah expressed with unfolding implications, obtain for yourself a very large vellum scroll to make this known. Choose to write in the common characters associated with mortal man concerning, Mahar Shalal Chushbaz, the rapid and thoughtless plunder of celebrating militants. Yashayah / Isaiah 8 verse 1. We are beneficiaries of Yahowah asking his prophets to record his revelations in writing. Even today, it is as if we were there, listening right along with Yashayah. In addition, we should be grateful that God invented the Hebrew alphabet with its pictorial letters. Using them, we are able to discern how what he conveyed applies to us because almost every letter was drawn to either depict mortal man or to show something useful to us. I will call upon and sustain a witness as a future herald to testify for me whose pronouncements are consistent with the evidence and who is logical, meticulous, and reliable because we can help one another by presenting what happened in the past to reveal what will occur in the future, consistent with Yada Yahowah's enlightenment, who functions as a counselor and advisor so as to Zechariah remember Yah as a child Yabarikihu blessed by Yahowah. Yashayah 8:2. Pronouncements on behalf of the enduring witness and restoring testimony of Yahowah should be logical, thorough, and reliable, consistent with the inspiration behind them. And God's message should be presented in a credible and verifiable manner. Since Uriah HaKohen Uriah the priest built a pagan altar for King Achaz, Yahowah is using the meaning behind this name to affirm that his witnesses will be enlightening. Further, he will function as a counselor and advisor to the people. And so, I approached the prophetess and she conceived, giving birth to a son. Then Yahowah said to me, call his name Mahar Shalal Chushbaz, so senselessly impetuous he will be complicit in his victimization, being controlled and looted by the treacherous in this despicable conflict. 8:3, because before the boy calls out, my father, or my mother, the political prowess, military strength, and economic wealth of Damesek Damascus, along with the plunder and spoils of Shimron Samaria will be carried away in the presence of the king of Ashur Assyria. Yashayah 8:4. Yahowah has a proclivity for near and far prophecies. Samaria fell to Assyria 2,700 years ago. And, just 10 years from now, the Assyrian, who is the corporeal manifestation of Satan, will enter Jerusalem to subdue Israel. We have free will, but there is a consequence. Yet again, Yahowah spoke to me, continuing to testify regarding these dangerous future events, 8:5, to say, there is a consequence of these people having avoided and having rejected, coming to spurn the waters of Hashaloch of the one who is sent, who walks as a gentleman, moving deliberately and compassionately while also launching a scathing attack against Retzin the self-willed and pleasure-seeking, as well as Ben Ramaliahu the son exalted above Yah. Yashayah 8:6. This prophecy would play out over 2,700 years. By spurning Yahowah, Yisraelites became susceptible to a stream of foreign invaders from the Assyrians to the Babylonians, the Greeks and Romans. And then, by denying Dowd's role in fulfilling the Micro-EY, Jews would suffer under rabbis and popes. Therefore, pay attention. Yahowah, who is God Almighty, is withdrawing. Simultaneously, he will rise up against them with the waters of a powerful torrent in addition to the numerous soldiers of the political leader and dictator of Ashur, the Assyrian ruler, along with the entire manifestation of his power. And it will rise over all of its channels and travel over all of its banks. Yashayah 8:7. The prophet used the impending Syrian invasion of Israel to foretell a second incursion during our lifetimes, something which becomes obvious when we compare his 8th and 17th chapters. After the fall of Damascus sometime prior to 2030, a Hanahar hop that some powerful torrent of Islamic soldiers and militants will flood into Israel from Syria, so many that Yahowah will have to intervene to stem the tide. And it will sweep in and alter Yehuda, exerting the considerable force of a flood while extending up to and reaching the neck in adversarial fashion, stretching out its wings to fill the breadth of your land so that, Emmanuel God is with us. Yashayah 8:8. While unethical leaders are a common denominator among nations today, Israel is unique because of the constant struggle between secular and sectarian. An awkward power-sharing arrangement exists between religious fundamentalists, conservative, and progressive politicians within an ill-fitting and bribe-prone parliamentary system. So, for Yahowah to save his people, both the secular and sectarian must be rejected. People, if you choose to associate yourselves with misleading shepherds, form an alliance with disingenuous pastors, befriend harmful and destructive leaders, you will have chosen your fate, which is to be similarly confused and discouraged, divided, terrorized, and scattered. If you choose to listen and respond to a distant country, arming yourself while preparing for your defense, you are choosing to gird yourself for war, equipping your military in self-protection. By doing so, you will have chosen to be by yourself, having selected your own destiny, which is to be abolished or cast down, bewildered and broken. Yashayah 8:9. With the majority of Israelis expressing their allegiance to either misleading rabbis or politicians, the people have estranged themselves from Yahowah. Moreover, Israel's preoccupation with other nations has made it vulnerable. After a litany of compromises and concessions, very little is left. Therefore, Yahowah is warning his people that they are asking for war. Estranged from him, they will be left to defend themselves. But a time will come when their preparations for battle will be ineffective. The nation will be divided, intimidated, and then overwhelmed by the sheer number of militants. If you choose to devise your own schemes and plan your own course of action based upon the revolting and defiant counsel of those who promote malicious ideas, it will be nullified because you will have chosen to be in violation of the covenant. If you elect to convey such a message, talking incessantly about it, such notions will not stand, neither will they be fulfilled, because truly, Emmanuel, God is with us. Yashaya 8:10. Religious words are spellbinding, but they are invalid. Weapons are powerful, but they will not prevail, because, Emmanuel, God is with us. Indeed, this is what Yahowah said to me in a manner akin to a strengthening hand, thereby teaching me so that I would be correct, guiding me and instructing me such that I would recognize the importance of being right, keeping me from walking in the ways of these peculiar people, approaching by saying, Yashaya 8:11. I do not want you to continually speak of conspiracies, making a habit of claiming something is a covert plan, even responding to or designating something a conspiracy, acting upon anything which by association, the people claim is a conspiracy, regardless of whether it is a clandestine scheme to carry out harmful acts for a political or religious purpose, or just trying to tie things together in a scripted fashion to reveal a hidden agenda. And in addition, do not respect nor revel in, showing any regard for that which concerns them, wondering about or fearing them. Yashaya 8:12. The reason God is opposed to commingling his testimony with conspiratorial myths is because he does not want anyone associating his good name and restoring revelations with their conspiratorial schemes in an attempt to gain credibility. Further, the validity of his testimony is degraded by the promotion of such stupidity. And yet, in spite of this, conspiracies propagate like viruses. With each new iteration, humankind seems to lose a score of IQ points. God should never be associated with anything remotely religious or political. When it comes to Yahowah of the spiritual implements, never associate him with anything that is common, popular, or mundane. It is him you should be thinking about, respecting him while being inspired by him. And it is him you should be concerned about. Yashaya 8:13, then he will be as a sanctuary in a set-apart place. But he will also be as a stone for smiting, and as a rock for stumbling, for both houses of Yisrael. There is a trap and a snare for the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Yashaya 8:14, therefore, many shall stagger upon them and fall. They will be seized, shattered, and ensnared, lured into a trap, by others. And they will stumble and be overthrown with a great many rabbis also falling. They will be destroyed, some cut off with others ceasing to exist, ensnared and controlled, even captured, becoming immovable while clinging together. Yashaya 8:15. There was a decided split between the two houses of Yisrael at this time, with infighting between the northern kingdom, known collectively as Ephraim, or just Yisrael, and the southern kingdom of Yehudah Judah. The divide occurred following King Solomon, separating the chosen people into two houses, neither of which was allied with Yahowah. The consequence was explained by the prophet Hosea, through whom God revealed that both houses had broken his covenant and were no longer his children. He divorced himself from them, but not at the same time or forever. Apart from their errant co-opting of terms such as Torah, Sabbath, and Passover, Judaism falls well short of demeaning or discrediting Yahowah because religious Jews never include his name, and they are so oblivious they aren't credible. This is both by design and happenstance. God deliberately blinded his people to prevent them from associating their rhetoric with his revelations. And rabbis prefer to cite their own. Choose to wrap up, cover, and store the written testimony, keeping the correct information safe and secure from those who oppose it. Secure access to the Torah, limiting it to those I teach and instruct, because it is for those I reveal my knowledge, and thus to my disciples, to those receptive students who are willing to accept my guidance and learn from me. Yashaya 8:16. Unfortunately for Yisrael, there would be few, if any, takers throughout the millennia. Even today, yeshivas teach Talmud, not Torah. The proliferation of religion in Israel left Yahowah with a difficult decision. He could continue to subject his Torah to religious gerrymandering or conceal it from his already estranged people. He wanted them to understand it and come back home, but he could not allow them to change it or confuse others about his intent. So having seen well into the future, God realized that for the next 2,700 years he would find no one willing to listen or learn. During that time, he would essentially keep the Torah under wraps, waiting for the opportunity and proper timing, knowing that he would find someone he could teach, someone willing to listen and then share the insights with Yehudim. That time is now. Therefore, I will wait in anticipation, while appreciating that which cuts me into this relationship, drawing near Yahowah who I understand must now conceal his presence, making his appearance and characteristics, even his existence, unknown to the house of Yaakov. I will confidently await an outcome which is beneficial, anticipating a future ingathering in association with him. Yashaya 8:17. As a Nabi prophet, Yashaya was not responsible for attracting an audience, building a following, promoting this message, or saving anyone within his community. His lone mission was to accurately convey Yahowah's revelations. Further, since Yashaya isn't known to have performed a single sign or wonder, in the sense of a miracle, oath and mofeth are being used in this next statement to represent something far more impressive, more enduring, and useful, prophecy. By conveying a message which accurately foretold future events, Yahowah proved that he is God, that he inspired these words, and that we can trust what he has to say. Pay attention to me and to what I have conceived on behalf of the relationship, even to the children who Yahowah bestowed through me and placed before me. We serve as signs to illustrate the message and way, enabling you to properly respond to future events which will occur in Yisrael in conjunction with Yahowah of the spiritual implements who dwells along the ridgeline of Zion where these signs are posted. Yashaya 8:18. And when they say to you, you should consult with and expect answers from the mediums who speak for those who lived in the past, considering those who claim to communicate with ghosts as spiritualists who mediate and mutter their imaginative and unfounded opinions, and especially those who twitter toxic musings, don't do it. Instead, people, consult with God through the living rather than the dead. Yashaya 8:19. And with these words, the Zohar and Talmud are impugned. Unless inspired by the living God, the voices of the past have as much merit as their rotting bones. So why do so few consult with God through the living and so many listen to the likes of Paul, Akiba, Maimonides, and Muhammad? Every Christian saint, the sages among rabbinic Talmudists, and successful suicide bombers have more in common than death. According to the Torah and in concert with the written testimony which presents correct and corroborating information regarding the restoration of the relationship, if they do not speak in a manner consistent with this specific message, using similar words, then by association they lack discernment and will be for naught. They are unenlightened with no hope for tomorrow. Their faith in what they desire will be nullified without any chance for a new day as a result of their ignorance, and because those associated with Ben Shakar the children of the dawn are the offspring of Satan. Yashaya 8:20. This would be true of every religious text. They are disqualified by virtue of their inaccuracies and contradictions. Books as incongruent as the Talmud and Torah cannot coexist. And as a result, those who prefer faith to fact will cease to exist. They will pass through it stubborn and stiff-necked, strong-willed and perplexed, wholly resistant to any advice or assistance due to a puzzling lack of humility and an attitude of superiority. And they will experience cruelty as a result. Starving, they will be afflicted. It shall come to pass when they are improperly fed and weakened, they will become antagonized and provoked to anger, struggling with their change in status, frustrated with their cognitive dissonance over having been uprooted and splintered. Their standing will decline, and they will be treated with contempt, which is a result of their propensity to diminish the importance of the king who has long sought to lead and advise them, Melech, and because of their opposition to God, as they have turned away, abandoning this relationship. Yashaya 8:21. This conclusion of Yashaya/Isaiah 8 reveals the identity of the subject of the prophecy found in Isaiah 9 verse 6. It addresses events that will transpire just prior to God's return with his son. And since Dowd is the only Melech associated with Yahowah in this way, since he is the king of a united Yisrael, we have been afforded a rather important insight. Unto the land they will look, but behold, they will see disfavor and trouble along with adversarial antagonism as it shrinks in size during this time of darkness, of especially discouraging oppression. Into a place devoid of light, they will be driven, enticed as exiles and then banished as outcasts. Yashaya/liberation and salvation are from Yahowah/Isaiah 8 verse 22. The children of Yisrael have not spoken in a manner consistent with Yahowah's teaching and guidance for 3,000 years. As a result, the chosen people remain shrouded in darkness. Their dysfunctional attitude and sense of superiority render their best and brightest resistant to advice, even when it comes from God. As a result, Yisraelites find themselves demeaned, treated cruelly, often afflicted, and sometimes starving. Unable to accept responsibility for their decline in status and for having been uprooted from their land, the world would mock them, slandering and insulting their reputation as the chosen people. In Yashaya 8:21, the king who has long sought to lead and advise you, the counselor Yisraelites have shown a propensity to diminish in importance, is singular and speaks exclusively of Dowd, God's son, the Messiah, and Savior. He is the only anointed king through whom Yahowah spoke to Yehudim. And it is through Dowd, through his Mizmor Psalms and Mashal Proverbs, that you are being called home. This realization is especially poignant considering where all of this leads. God's unrelenting admonition against conspiracies is also relevant in this context because the most debilitating became the most popular, replacement theology, which essentially means, take everything away from the Dowd and the Jews. This happens to be the very reason the upcoming prophecy is mistranslated and misappropriated, claiming for the Christian, Jesus, what Yahowah conveyed about his son. Not only is Christianity the most pervasive anti-Semitic conspiracy in world history, the overwhelming preponderance of those prone to believe conspiracies are critical of Jews. As we turn past the artificial page break between the 8th and 9th chapters of Yashaya Isaiah, the subject remains the same as does the focus. We are approaching the time of Yaakov's Israel's troubles. Fortunately, in the midst of this darkness, surrounded by adversarial influences, a day is rapidly approaching when a ray of hope will brighten to become a homing beacon. This transition commences with Indeed, truthfully and nevertheless, there has been no lack of counsel, no reason for discouragement, or inability to flee from the darkness. Lo, Mu'af Lahai, there is no reason for doom and gloom, despair or dejection because there is no shortage of advice and wisdom on how to take flight, from ability to take flight and fly away, for those subjugated and constrained along the way, La Asher Mutzak, for those restricted and oppressed, for those deprived of liberty who endure hardships during distressing times as a result of the relationship, as there was during the previous time, Kaha Eth Harishon, as was the case prior, and in comparison to the initial occasion, when he receded from Kalel, when he came to disdain and show little regard for, Hyphal perfect, the land of Zebulun, Eretz Zebulun, Zebulun, son of Jacob and Leah, place of the honored and exalted and where the egotistical reside and brag about themselves, and the land of Naphtali. Waha, Eretz Naphtali. Naphtali, son of Jacob and Bilhah, place of twisting and wrestling. In this latter time, during the last days, Waha Akaron, yet in the end, he will deal harshly with the troublesome nature of, caved, he will struggle with the intensely oppressive and onerous weight and the grievous and bothersome nature of the dim-witted, harsh, stubborn, and intransigent masses associated with the large, pretentious populations of people of, Hyphal perfect, the way of the sea, Derek Hayam, the path of the water and a metaphor for Gentiles, beyond, Eber, across and on. The eastern and opposite side of the Yarden to go down, Ha-Yarden, the Jordan River, to descend, from Yered, to go down, of Galil the circuitous and convoluted way, Galil, Galilee, turning in circuitous, rolling away in convoluted, the pivot point of the socio-political realm, the open doorway, of the Gowan Gentiles, Gowan, the confluence of ethnicities, non-Yisraelites, and other nations. Yashayah/liberation and salvation are from Yah/Isaiah 9 verse 1. Yahowah receded from the northern kingdom, leaving Yisrael susceptible to attack, beginning with the Assyrian conquests. Then, as predicted in Hosea, God withdrew from Judea, leaving Jews vulnerable to the Roman assaults, including the abuses suffered under the Roman Church, followed by the violent nature of Muslims and the Third Reich. The subjugation of Jews continues today under progressives and socialists. And yet, there has always been a means to flee the darkness open to those willing to trust the Torah, its Mikra and Berith. For the tens of millions of Jews who have suffered grave indignities, and worse, at the hands of conspiratorial Gentiles, Yahowah's assertion that they could have escaped may seem incredulous. And that is largely because they sought the wrong kind of relief. Upon careful consideration, there never was any rational reason for God to intervene to protect or heal anyone here on earth because none have sought him. And while that is counter to every religious notion, it is nonetheless true. There is no reason for God to intervene on behalf of those who do not know him and who don't listen to him. Doing so would undermine everything he said and did for us. As always, we would be wise to acknowledge everything Father and Son have already provided. They made every sacrifice and shared all of the advice and counsel we would ever need. There is no reason for any of us to be alone, living in the darkness, dismayed or discouraged. As long as we know where to look and whom to trust, the light of life illuminates the path to home. The noted exception to Yahowah's prerogative to not intervene in our current reality to protect and heal his children, or anyone for that matter, is depicted in Mizmor 91. He pledges to defend the individuals he chooses for a mission, sufficiently enabling them to get the job done. Even then, such individuals receive heartaches and headaches. Learning from and overcoming such obstacles better prepares us to achieve the desired result. The ultimate example was Dowd, a man who was never immune to anguish. Even those living in Zebulun and Naphtali could have been emancipated long ago had they read and accepted the Torah, Mizmor 180. And yet, unfortunately, Yahowah could not find a single individual from either tribe through whom he could communicate his message of liberation. While God is knowable even without a personal introduction, such connections seldom occur because of insurmountable societal interference and institutional obstacles. Therefore, the principal difference in this timeline between then and now is that God, rather than retreating, is about to return. If you are reading this, capitalize on your good fortune. We know that there was a brief respite under Hezekiah when Yehudah Judah returned to Yahowah's Torah teaching. They rid their land of religious artifacts and places of worship, then celebrated Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim. Unfortunately, even then Zebulun was listed along with Manasseh as the two tribes who mocked and scorned Hezekiah's messengers as they traveled around Yisrael to invite the people to participate in the upcoming feast of unyeasted bread. Having given up on countless lost generations, Yahowah withdrew. He held Yisrael in contempt, the same way he perceives the religious today. This is the dawning of a new day. The darkness will fade to light. The oppressed will finally be liberated. And while that is the best possible news for Yisrael, and a long time coming, God is also announcing that he will hold the Gentiles accountable for badgering and burdening his people. The day which Christians long to see will become their nightmare. Before we move on past the reference to Zebulun and Naphtali in concert with the eastern side of the Yarden and the Sea of Galilee, we'd be wise to consider the geographical, historical, genetic, and etymological implications. Their names suggest that they harbored an inappropriate attitude toward Yah, with one seeing itself as exalted, while the other wrestled with him. Naphtali was the furthest north, located along both sides of the Jordan River and within the Galilee watershed, bordering the sea's western shore. Zebulun was its southern neighbor. King Ben-Hadad of Aram Damascus persecuted and desolated Naphtali in the 9th century BCE. In the 8th century, Naphtali and Zebulun were the first to feel the sting of the Assyrian conquest and suffer deportation as slaves. It is also worth noting that both sons, Zebulun and Naphtali, were born out of envy, with Leah and Rachel fighting to impress Jacob, enticing him with their servants. Their allocation of land was, therefore, the furthest from Jerusalem, which made them susceptible to marauding Gentiles. Their territory served as the gateway to Jerusalem, which was always the prize. Those who would march through Zebulun and Naphtali en route to Yehudah would include the likes of the Amalekites and Hittites, the aforementioned Assyrians and Babylonians, followed by the Greeks and Romans, the Byzantines and Ottomans, the Roman Catholic Crusaders, and more recently, Hezbollah and Hamas. Less than a decade from now, and after the fall of Syria, it will be the entry point for a flood of jihadists. At the time of this prophecy, and for 2,500 years thereafter, the lands of Zebulun and Naphtali would be scarred by Gentile interlopers. And it seems now that these lands shall be among the first to be liberated. The most telling word in this portion of Yah's prophetic pronouncement is kaved. Its primary meaning isn't to honor, but, instead, to make weighty and burdensome, revealing that Yahowah will struggle with the intensely oppressive and onerous weight, as well as the grievous and troublesome nature of the dim-witted, harsh, stubborn, and intransigent masses associated with the way of the sea, i.e., Gentiles. They are going down as a result of their circuitous and convoluted thinking. In this vein, Derek Hayam can be translated either as the way of the sea, serving as a reference to Gentiles, or the path of the water, which is a directional reference. When the subject is the Yarden, which means to descend, there is an ominous message for the convoluted Gowan Gentiles concerning where they are headed. Addressing the convoluted and circuitous thinking of Gentiles, this prophecy was corrupted in the Gospel of Matthew with a twisted and inaccurate rendition which reads, "And leaving Nazareth, which did not exist until the early 4th century and rise of Roman Catholicism, he went and lived in Capernaum by the sea, in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled, the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles, the people dwelling in darkness have seen a great light, and for those dwelling in the region and shadow of death on them a light has dawned." Gospel of Matthew 4 verses 13 to 16. That was so divergent from the actual prophecy it is clearly a Catholic creation. Compare it to, indeed, there has been no lack of counsel, no reason for discouragement, nor inability to flee for those who have been deprived of their freedom and constrained along the way as there was during the previous time when he receded from the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. And so, in the latter time he will struggle with the intensely oppressive and onerous weight, as well as the grievous and troublesome nature of the dim-witted and intransigent masses associated with the way of the sea beyond the Yarden to go down of Galilee, the circuitous and convoluted way of the Gowan Gentiles, followed by the people, the family or nation of kinsmen who share the same ethnicity, culture, and language, and who are biologically related, typically used in reference to Yisrael and to distinguish Yisraelites from Gowan, singular masculine, who walked, halak, who traveled through life, kal participle, a verbal adjective that should be interpreted literally and relationally, in the darkness and were confused, ha-choshek, in ignorance without the light, obscured and unenlightened. Have been shown, have been able to observe, kal perfect, an actual, wholly complete, and thus not ongoing, revelation of, an astonishingly important, gadol, an extensive and expansive, a great and distinguished, an older and enabling, an especially forceful and capable, from gadol, to become important and enable growth by accomplishing great things, to be magnified and empowered, light, or, source of enlightenment presented in absolute contrast to darkness, with warmth and brilliance akin to the sun. For those who have dwelt, yashab, those who have lived and who may remain, kal participle, literally and vividly, in the realm, eretz, in the land, of the shadow of death, samaweth, the foreboding darkness of dying, from tsel, shadow impeding the light and moth, death, perishing at the hands of others, often executed prematurely after being dispatched to die, the light, or, the source of enlightenment presented in absolute contrast to the surrounding darkness, with warmth and brilliance akin to the sun, has shined brilliantly upon them to enlighten them, nega, alhem, has been presented as a luminary over them, providing the enlightenment, knowledge, and understanding needed to respond appropriately, attractive, even beautiful, in his appearance and radiant in his demeanor before them, kal perfect, actually and completely, but for a finite period of time, masculine plural in reference to the members of the family. Yashayah. Liberation and salvation are from Isaiah 9 verse 2. This prophecy opened with a condemnation of Gentiles. It is, therefore, not predicting their awakening. Further, the Gentiles at the time of the Christian era were the killers, not those living under death's shadow. That remains so to this day. The Christian misrepresentation is, therefore, incredulous. There is no evidence to suggest that a single gowy, much less many, saw or recognized Dowd/David as the Pesach Isle, much less knew what that represents. There was no light, great or otherwise, in year 4000 Yah/33 CE. This was an exceedingly dark period for Yehuda, and it would only get worse over time. Not a single eyewitness account spoke of an arrival of light shining brilliantly upon them. And this is because Dowd will be the light, as bright as the sun, but not at that time. He will not manifest such glory until his return on Yom Kippurim in year 6000 Yah/2033 CE. Yashayah is, therefore, speaking to the remnant of Yisraelites living in the last days, during the transition from the time of Yaakov's troubles to the grand reunion. Those who rekindle their relationship with Yah as a result of Dowd's brilliant oratory and Yashayah's prophecies will see his light shine upon them when he returns. And they, too, will have lived through the shadow of death. And in their case, Yahowah is now approaching them rather than retreating. There isn't any justification for a middle ground, for concluding that a great many people witnessed something profoundly illuminating in 33 CE. The fact is, then as now, fewer than 1 in a million people recognize that Dowd, as the Messiah and King, became the Passover lamb, nor do they realize the Son of God is returning as brilliant as the sun. God's people are just now becoming aware of this realization. Dowd's light shines upon the observant, and it has done so for 3,000 years. Our eyes are finally being opened to his brilliance. Dowd is the 7 billion kilowatt homing beacon Yahowah empowered to guide his family back to him at long last. Unfortunately, the religious have disconnected the source of his light while obscuring and inverting the lens through which he can be seen, blocking any recognition of Dowd. It would take a gowy 27 centuries after this announcement to plug the light back in, flip the switch, clear away the muck on the optics, and restore God's luminary. As we approach the next statement, there are 2 ways to translate Rabba ha-Gowy. The first favors a singular empowered gowy Gentile who plays a role in the enlightenment of God's people pursuant to announcing the arrival of the Gadol or. The second has Dowd referring to Yahowah's family as a great, gowy nation, which is improbable on this occasion because it will be in tatters at this time and will remain so until after Dowd's return. The Messiah is tasked with saving his people from the brink of extinction at the hands of Gowan. Therefore, because the Gentiles are the source of the ensuing darkness, God is not going to have us confuse one for the other. Moreover, considering Dowd's incontrovertible declaration in the 118th Mizmor of ridding the world of Gentiles upon his return, it's inconceivable that Yah referred to his family as a gowy Gentile nation at this time. With this in mind, we are left with the realization that Yahowah is addressing the role a gowy will play in drawing his people back to the light by amplifying his word. This is the most literal rendering of the phrase Rabba ha-Gowy. You have raised up and enabled the Gentile, Rabba ha-gowy, you have increased the capability of this particular gowy to magnify and amplify your word, rearing him as if he were your own offspring, empowering and expanding the ability of this individual who is ethnically unrelated and who comes from a distant place and time, equipping the Gentile to continue the mission, or alternatively, you have increased the nation. Hyphal perfect second person masculine singular, Yahowah is responsible for enabling this lone gowy, empowering him such that he begins to reflect Yah's nature and intent by amplifying his word for a period of time, without boasting or exalting yourself, nor improperly speaking of the favors you sought to bestow, lo, gadol, without glorifying or promoting yourself, Hyphal perfect, for a finite time you trained the gowy such that he could represent you in an unpretentious manner. Yashayah/Isaiah 9 verse 3 in part. This did not occur in 33 CE, nor on behalf of Christianity, no matter how one convolutes the evolving myths. While a powerful nation, Yahowah had nothing to do with Rome. From his perspective, they were the most vicious and anti-Jewish of beasts. He did not raise them up on this occasion nor did he enable their savage destruction of his temple, land, people, and son. Moreover, from this point forward, Rome began to disintegrate under the weight of her own grotesque immorality. Likewise, this cannot speak of Judea because the tiny nation would soon cease to exist. Rome would persecute Jews, robbing, enslaving, and murdering God's chosen to their last gasping breath. And there were no Gentile eyewitnesses who claimed to have seen a great light. Even in the fairy tale, the only eyewitness to wax poetic about a light dwelling among them was Yehochanan, a Jew. And even then, he would claim that he was filled with Charis, the pagan Greek goddesses known for their naked presence at frivolous events. Back to reality, should you question why Yahowah would promise through this prophecy to raise up and enable a gowy to call his people home while not exalting himself, the answer is found in Shemoth/Exodus. Long ago, when the Torah was first revealed, Yahowah understood the intimidation his children experienced because of his overwhelming presence, light, and voice, the opposite of what he intended. And so, he would refrain from lo, gadol improperly speaking of the favors he had sought to bestow upon his people. And yet, knowing that he had to address them if any were to come home prior to the fulfillment of Yom Kippurim in year 6000 Yah, in the preamble of the most profound prophecy regarding what he was planning to do to make this possible, he introduced the gowy who would serve as his witness. For a finite time, God equipped a gowy such that he would represent him in an unpretentious manner. And now, you are witnessing the fulfillment of that prophecy for the first time since these words were scribed circa 743 BCE, 777 and 2777 years prior to Dowd's fulfillment of the Moedim. A gowy has been raised up and enabled by God such that he has become the voice explaining that Dowd David is this light. This lone Gentile is the first, only, and most vociferous individual to prove that this entire prophecy, one relentlessly denied by Jews and incessantly claimed by Christians, speaks of the Messiah and Son of God, the Chosen One, and the subject of 2 Samuel 7 and the 89th Psalm. Yahowah's prophet scribed his revelations and his witnesses shared them, so, to hear God speak, we have to pay attention, be observant, and listen carefully. From that lone exception on Choreb, when his voice boomed from atop the mountain, through 450 BCE with the last prophet, Malachi, Yahowah communicated with his people through Nabi prophets. And they were always Yisraelites and Yehudim like Moses, Dowd, and Yashayah, until now. What changed is that his people stopped listening to him. God's voice was drowned out by power-hungry men with other agendas. Over this vast chasm of time, Yahowah searched the world to find a single Yahud among his chosen who would respond, but there was nothing but a deafening silence. Since this problem was so pervasive, and his solution so exceptional, Yahowah decided that the best course of action was to warn Yisrael in advance of it occurring so that when it happened as predicted, they would finally pay attention. He would address Yehudim through a gowy, telling them about one of their own, their Messiah and King. This would not be a once-and-done announcement from God to his people. The Almighty would ask his prophets to speak of the latter-day gowy often, addressing his role at the most opportune moments. And what could be more fortuitous than this, with the gowy presented in the preamble of his most commonly recited prophecy regarding his son and the work they would accomplish together. Yahowah is on record announcing that he would fortify a gowy to garner his people's attention. He would prop him up and empower him, equipping him to do what Yehudim should have done. It would be like using a candle to announce the arrival of a sun as brilliant as the sun. This would be a miracle worth elaborating on. It would not be the first time that Yahowah would move his people with a single, ill-equipped individual. On a similar occasion, and as a prelude to an earlier Yatzah, Exodus, he confronted the most egotistical nation on earth to retrieve the children of Yisrael using a stuttering shepherd. It worked last time, so why not this time? Although, to properly calibrate our expectations, on the previous occasion, only 2 of the 600,000 God sought to rescue actually made it into the Promised Land, and even that took 40 years. This time, we only have 32 years and no extensions. However, while I am not of Moses' caliber, the potential audience has grown 30-fold, and the technology needed to reach them is infinitely superior. This known, the mission is forecast to be successful. Those who are willing to listen will be delighted with the outcome of our journey. The final harvest may be small, but it will be joyous. It will be enriching too, as all that is Yah's to give will be lavished upon his children. Yah's people are coming home. This is a harvest in conjunction with a family reunion. The delight, simcha, the elation and cheerful attitude, the pleasure and happiness, they will joyfully express, samak, they, addressing the family, will happily manifest, outwardly conveying their cheerful contentment at that moment in time, cal perfect, as they approach your presence, lapana, ada, as they draw near and appear before you, will be comparable to, ka, will be similar to, the jubilation experienced, simcha, the happiness and cheerfulness, the elation and pleasure. The delight expressed, during the harvest, ba ha-katzer, in the collecting of the fruit during the time of reaping in the proper season, consistent with, ka asher, comparable to, rejoicing over the favorable circumstances, gyl, the gladness expressed in joyous shrieks, shouts, and songs, kal imperfect, genuinely and continually, when they are apportioned, ba chalakam. With their assignment, distribution, and allotment of, peel infinitive, they receive the benefits of the inheritance with the apportionment expressed as an actionable noun regarding that which is valuable, shalal, the good property and possessions offered to the victorious who prevail as a spoil. Yashayah/liberation and salvation are from Isaiah 9 verse 3. Captain Obvious is itching to point out that unless you believe that God's idea of a joyous harvest is the death and enslavement of his people, this event did not occur in year 4000 Yah/33 CE. Therefore, one would have to be a blithering idiot, or religious buffoon, to believe that the ensuing prophecy is addressing the mythical misnomer, Jesus. The reference to a jubilant harvest and joyous apportionment speaks of the integration of the Ey and Berith. We have been invited to attend the harvest so that we might share in the distribution of the covenant's benefits. As such, this message is for returning Yisraelites, for those who will answer Yahuwah's invitation to engage in a familial relationship, particularly on Yom Kippurim, the day of reconciliations in year 6000 Yah/2033 CE. It cannot be for the religious. At the behest of rabbis, Jews denied Dowd's fulfillment of the Moedim, especially Pesach. They eliminated Matzah, they denied Bikurim, they believe Shabuah was fulfilled 3,472 years ago, they replaced Towrah with a Babylonian holiday, and they appended Kippurim such that it is the opposite of its intent. It cannot be for Christians either because they disdain the Ey and replace them all with pagan holidays. And they substituted a New Testament for the Berith and Jesus for Dowd. Even in their fanciful New Testament mythology, Jesus did not bring joy to Christians. According to their religious lore, they suffered persecution. There was no harvest either. And of course, the church deliberately distanced itself from Yahowah, besmirching his witness and reputation in the process. Therefore, this prophecy cannot pertain to Jesus or to Christians. Moreover, since Dowd will be ridding the world of Christians, the faithful will have nothing to celebrate. Reading this, now in the 21st century, the notion of a shalal, spoil, seems a bit arcane. However, the allotment is intriguing because by this time a world spoiled by religion, politics, and war will be wrenched away from the Gowan, while their institutions, militaries, and governments are deprived of everything they had sought to take from God's people. In this case, should a spoil be taken from them, it will be justified. However, it is more likely that Chalak Hem Shalal, their valuable apportionment, will be comprised of the blessings and benefits of the Berith and Ey. This is what the children of Yisrael will be receiving and celebrating during this Yom Kippurim reunion. Before we move on, it is interesting to note that gyl rejoicing was scribed in the imperfect, and therefore for the first time in this prophecy, is addressing something unconstrained in time. This suggests that the fruit of this harvest will endure forever. As we now move forward, we find God speaking of a single individual being liberated from societal constraints and freed of financial, religious, and political burdens. With that in mind, the last masculine singular reference in this pronouncement addresses Gowy, the Gentile responsible for disseminating God's message such that the result would be a joyous homecoming and reunion. For, ky, indeed, truly, the constraints, ol, the wooden frame and straps of a yoke used to control working animals, from elo, to act severely and wantonly, dealing harshly and ruthlessly, of burdensome labor, economic pressures, or societal challenges pertaining to him, sobel who, of demands on his time, resulting hardships or compulsory obligations, and, wa, that which is associated with, death, the religious or political influences, mate, the ruling ornamental stick used as a symbol of religious authority and its ability to control and compel capitulation, from nada, to stretch out and influence, to extend one's reach, and to cause one to bow down and be thrust aside, continually upon his back, especially early on, Shechem who, repeatedly against his neck and shoulder at the beginning, you have diminished and even eliminated because you detest these things, chat hath. You have shattered and discouraged that which you dread and disavow as distracting, divisive, dashing, and breaking their horrible and destructive influence. Along with the rod and scepter of governmental authority over him, Shebet Hanogs Ba who, the rod of political and institutional influence and control over him, the club of those seeking to exploit him based upon partisan divisions, people who like to make and enforce rules acting like his slave drivers and tax collectors, those forcing him into hard labor and exacting payment from him as he engages in the marketplace for goods and services. Yashayah/liberation and salvation are from Isaiah 9 verse 4. Since this addresses the Gowy Gentile who was engaged by God to call his people home for their Kippurim reunion with Dowd, Yahowah recruited this foreigner using the same criteria he deployed when selecting Moses, the one who draws out. Moses knew nothing about Yahowah, not even his name, at the time of his calling, but he had a keen understanding of the political, religious, military, and economic forces at play in Egypt. The depravity of man's way was readily discernible to Moses, which is why he rejected it and became a shepherd. The reason Yahowah prefers this approach is because he prefers teaching us everything we need to know about his Torah, his Ey, and his Berith, rather than warning us about religion and politics. Sharing his guidance is uplifting and enriching while disparaging religion and politics is annoying. Moses required no instruction on the latter, allowing Yahowah to focus on the mission at hand. The things of God are fun, they are enlightening and empowering, even emancipating. But there is nothing pleasant about man's most pervasive deceptions. Religion is a nasty business, something God clearly wants to avoid. Therefore, out of the hundreds of millions of souls occupying the planet at that time, God chose the ideal person, one already predisposed to demonstrate his disdain for these human contrivances. Yah would teach him the rest. The Torah is the result. Moving forward a few thousand years, and on the cusp of the final exodus, God's predilections have not changed. Therefore, he found and solicited, then equipped and enabled a Gentile in a similar situation. With so much to accomplish through an otherwise ill-prepared individual explains why we find God working to diminish his economic burdens as well as the effect of religious and political influences on him. To be of any value to Yehudim, Yahowah needed his undivided attention. There would be a lot to learn and share. Fortunately, the information Yahowah wanted him to convey was readily available and easily verified. Freed from distractions and benefiting from God's overwhelming support, this gowy could devote the time to tell the intellectually captivating story of God and his Son. Working on behalf of the creator of the universe and author of life and for Dowd, the most interesting man who ever lived, would not be a burden. As we move deeper into God's introductory statement, we find that Shechem is from the verbal root, shakam, which speaks vociferously about Dowd's continuous passion and dedication. Shakam depicts traits this Gentile admires in the consummate Yehudi, and to a much lesser degree, traits he shares with him. We are shakam, diligent and enthusiastic workers, getting an early start each day, continually focused upon the succession of events that played out on the ridgeline of Maria, passionately pursuing our calling, persistently shouldering the responsibility, which leads to conveying Yahowah's word, willingly over and over again for a prolonged period of time. It is Dowd's shakam that so endeared Yahowah to him. Even though we are among the 1 in a million who make this connection and revel in it, I suspect our Father is not only pleased we noticed but also thrilled we called this to his family's attention. While it is just a footnote in the fulfillment of this prophecy, from my bedroom, I see the first streaks of reddish-orange light rising above the sea around 5 o'clock each morning. I typically rise with them, eager to begin translating and analyzing Yahowah's testimony hours before most even begin to stir. It is my favorite time of day. It is also possible that Shechem appeared here in connection with this Gentile because he is the first in 3,000 years to properly attribute this prophecy to the Son of God, our Messiah and Savior. And that's no small thing because the direction we take with regard to this declaration will lead us either to Yahowah and the covenant or away from them. This assessment brings us face to face with a number of vital questions. Are we to observe the Torah, maybe, wa mizmor as we seek to learn about Yahowah or try to find him in the Talmud? Are we to learn from Dowd's counsel and see his words as enlightening, or should we study Paul's and Akiba's? Who is the son who was given? Who is the man who valiantly defended God's people? Who is speaking for God? Who is the counselor? Is Yahowah drawing our attention to Dowd, who is conveniently named in this prophecy, or to Jesus, who is not? From a historical perspective, who at the time of Yahowah's writing had been the most prominent person in the life of Yisrael, the Messiah and King, David, or the mythical misnomer, Jesus? Which individual are Yehudim most likely to follow out of political and religious Babylon and back to Yisrael? In the battle of ideas between the world's most popular religious faith and the Word of God, our perceptions of Dowd serve as the fulcrum upon which everything pivots. Central to that debate is whether this prophecy pertains to a man or a myth, to Ben, El, Mashyach, Melech, Wa'areh, the Zoroah, and the Pesach, Isle, or to a nightmarish fairy tale on par with Dionysus and Odysseus. On Dowd's side of this equation, there are 1,000 fulfilled prophecies and declarative statements. On the other side of the ledger, there is nothing, a man whose name is stated over 1,000 times compared to one whose name was never mentioned. So how is it then that faithful prefer the obvious fraud to the most interesting man in human history by a factor of 1,000,000,000 to 1? Considering the consequence of getting this right, and cognizant that the fate of Yisrael on Yom Kippurim hinges on Yahowah's guidance, it seems evident that this phraseology regarding this gowy was placed in the preamble of the most misappropriated prophecy to help answer these questions. And as we set forth in our quest to know Father and Son better, we find that they provide the means to unravel the misguided mythos of replacement theology, the most debilitating influence on humankind. By accurately translating this prophecy, and appreciating its intent, we were able to unravel the lies upholding Judaism and Christianity. And with them impugned, Yisraelites are free to come home to Yahowah. Turns out that all that was ever needed to accurately translate Yashaya 9:4, 5, and 6 was to pay attention to the context, subject, and grammar. For example, rather than a conjunction linking the two implements wielded by those in power, Shabat is a construct. This reveals that the implements associated with religious and political institutions work in concert with one another as they extend and impose their reach. Speaking of grammar, there is no question that who is correctly translated as the third-person masculine singular pronoun him in English. However, who can be it when addressing a singular masculine noun such as gowy, so long as gowy is translated as foreign nation rather than individual Gentile. But since gawim is used to distinguish Gentile nations from Yisrael, this option is in opposition to the message. Further, while nation and people are singular, both are comprised of many people, requiring the pronoun addressing either to be plural, and thus them, rather than him or it. I share this because my translation is markedly different from most others and the grammar makes it appear somewhat self-centric. And yet, since there is no one else to whom any of this might potentially apply, denying the obvious would be disrespectful to Yahowah and devastating to his people. It appears obvious that Yahowah found an underutilized and retired implement, and after liberating him from the control and influence of others, put that tool to use in a productive way. For the first time in nearly 3,000 years, words and insights that eluded humanity's grasp are being revealed. In the process, Yahowah becomes known to more Yehudim prior to his return than would have otherwise occurred. And his son is finally receiving the respect he is due. These translations and insights do not rely on previously unrevealed revelations or additional prophets. The truth, though unnoticed by many, has been available to God's people for nearly 3,000 years. It means that this gowy isn't a prophet, but instead a devoted translator with an inquisitive mind and an enabling spirit. As a result, God can honestly say that the means to know him and engage in the covenant relationship with him has been there all the time, just waiting for his people to take him up on his offer. And if not now, then Yehudim are running out of tomorrows. His return, on Yom Kippurim/the Day of Reconciliations, is just 10 years away from this writing. In every way but one, I suspect that Yah would have preferred that his tool have Hebrew roots, that he would till Yisraelite soil, and be of Yehudi origin. But since there weren't any such people available, none willing to disassociate from all forms of human authority, who were willing to be used in opposition to religion, politics, patriotism, and conspiracy, God found another way. If not this gowy, who else is engaged in promoting these discoveries about Yahowah and his beloved Son at this time for the benefit of his people? Who else is translating these words and sharing these insights? If there is another, I'm thrilled for Yah and Yehudim. And should I be this gowy, I'm grateful for having had the opportunity. God has done everything and more that was promised in this declaration. Even this week as I returned to this prophecy, I found myself unburdened in miraculous ways. And so here I sit, seeking to understand and share everything Yahowah intended for his people to know. There is a reason that God may have actually preferred working with a gowy in this regard. He would serve as a not too subtle reminder of the fact that Yehudim are to blame for their estrangement. It could have been different, it should have been different. Their very name, Yahud, reveals that they are Yahowah's chosen people. God's words were written in Hebrew. The scrolls unearthed in Yisrael are the source of our translations. And since they forfeited their calling, Yahowah may have wanted them to eat a slice of humble pie, one served up by a Gentile. Speaking of the scrolls found in Qumran, and transitioning from the last statement to the next, according to the great Isaiah scroll, there is a wa, and before ka, as in the following statement. That's important because, in Hebrew, conjunctions are used to indicate the beginning of a new sentence. Therefore, I pulled the concluding phrase from the previous verse and added it to this one since the reference to midden is a better fit for what follows than what preceded it. And, wa, then, from one QSA not in the MT, as in the day, ka yaum, comparable to the time, of midden of questions regarding judgment, midden, Midian, quarrelsome discord and strife based upon variant alterations and modifications, conflicting interests and contentiousness, or the exercise of good judgment leading to resolving a dispute, a compound of my, pondering the who, what, why, where, when, and how of dine, the kind of thinking which leads to either vindication or contentious arguments depending upon the judgment of the one pleading the case, 9:4, surely since, ky, indeed by contrast because, every, boot, esaon, sandal of a soldier, from esaon, the treading and trampling feet of warriors, of marching armies, esaon, of militaries on the move who tread and tramp upon, is part of the commotion and clamor of battle, barash. The riotous discordant sounds of chaos, the staccato percussion of weapons and the rumbling earthquake of trembling of those doing the fighting and the shuddering and fearful response of those seeking to defend themselves. And since, the attire, simla, the cloaks, clothing, and garments, is befouled by wallowing, galo, made filthy dirty by rolling, in blood, dam, they will come to exist as, wahayallah, they will be, fuel, ma'akaleth, that which is consumed and destroyed, from, akal, to be devoured, eaten up and devastated, to be burned up, serapha, thoroughly kindled and combusted, in the fire of blazing light and radiant energy, bright and glowing illumination. Yashayah/liberation and salvation are from Yah/Isaiah 9 verse 5. For Christians to misappropriate the prophecy presented in the next statement, they must disregard the fact that it is introduced by an overt reference to midden Midian and that it speaks of a loud and bloody army that is incinerated by God. That did not occur in conjunction with the alleged birth of a baby god nor in the years leading up to the death of said god in 33 CE. Pointing out the obvious, this has not transpired at any time in our past. And it will not occur prior to Dowd's return with Yahowah in 2033, year 6000 Yah. Since the prophecy regarding the Son who is given follows this statement, it's telling that the religious ignore it, for no other reason than it doesn't fit their narrative. And while ignorance may be the path to faith, it does not lead to Yah. Therefore, when we realize that the next line of this prophecy speaks of a child being born and of a son given, we are compelled by what has just been said to recognize that some portion of Yashayah/Isaiah 9 verses 6-7 must apply to the prophets past and our future. Specifically, Yahowah's light is going to incinerate every soldier the world over upon his return. Be forewarned, do not enlist, equip, or support any military force because it will put you in opposition to Yahowah. God does not support troops. He does not take sides in human conflicts. He is not patriotic or pro-military. Quite the opposite, he is going to obliterate everyone in uniform and everything used to conduct war. In a nation like America, which is home to 40% of Jews worldwide, and where any reluctance to support the armed forces and salute the flag is considered an egregious offense against the country, Yahowah's overt hostility toward those things isn't good news. Returning to midden, of the 24 times its root, dine, appears in the Hebrew text, for are in parallel with shapat, to decide by being discerning, which is to exercise good judgment. It is twice used in conjunction with mishpat, making midden somewhat equivalent in meaning. Therefore, it is fair to say that midden Midian serves as a referendum on our ability to think. As for the land of Midden, it is first mentioned in Shemoth/Names 2:15. Moses fled to this place as an act of conscience. He demonstrated himself worthy by having walked away from a leadership position within the dictatorial government of Mitzrayim/Egypt, which was overwhelmingly religious, aggressively militant, and oppressive in its imposition of a caste system. As such, his sojourn to Midden is symbolic of dissociating ourselves from these same corrosive institutions today. It is a call for God's people to walk away from the modern manifestations of religious, political, and geographic Babylon, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, Europe and the United States, as well as from engagements in the Middle East. Had Abraham not left Babylon, God would not have led him to the promised land. Had the children of Yisrael not left Mitzrayim, Yahowah would not have led them back to Yisrael by way of Midden. Similarly, the Jews who remain bound to their religion, political party, or place within a foreign land will be excluded from the remnant who witness Yahowah's return with King Dowd. Therefore, knowing what we are leaving, and why, is nearly as vital as realizing where we are going. And to appreciate this, it is important to recognize that Mount Choreb/Horeb is in Midden, the first point of safety after fleeing Mitzrayim. It is the place where the Torah was revealed and Yisrael listened directly to Yahowah. Midden was the last place Yisrael listened directly to Yahowah. And prior to this time, it was in Midden/Midian that Moses first came to gather and shepherd sheep. It is where Yahowah reached out to him and asked him to help liberate his people. There is no better place or preparation for serving Yahowah's children. It was in Midden that Moses was welcomed as if he were a Gentile. After he and his Midian wife gave birth to their first son, Gershom, Moses said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. Shemoth/Names 2:22, indeed, every Gentile adopted into the covenant immediately comes to realize that this also applies to them. When Yahowah found Moses in Midden/Midian, he appeared to be an unexpected choice from a worldly perspective. He had left Egypt, where he lived like royalty. The Hebrew slaves he had risked everything to save from the oppressive regime, rather than show their appreciation for his sacrifice, turned against him. It would be a harbinger of the relationship between Yahowah and Yisrael. Nonetheless, Moses showed great courage, character, and compassion in opposing the religious and political establishment which had made life so degrading for everyone apart from the Pharaoh's family and his priests. It would be predictive of what the Roman Church would do to Jews and their own throughout Europe. As a Yisraelite among Gentiles, Moses witnessed how cruel men become when they are molded by their nation. He also experienced just how unappreciative and disloyal the Yisraelites can be. But then, he also saw that an individual gowy can be moral and welcoming. While those experiences forged Moses' character, there is no denying that he was an 80-year-old man with a speech impediment. He was out tending sheep in a God-forsaken corner of the Arabian desert when Almighty God chose this lone individual to convey his name and word to the world. Therefore, by man's standards, Moses was an odd choice to liberate the children of Yisrael from religious and political bondage. Nonetheless, the Yatsa exodus from Mitzrayim actually began in Midian. Subsequently, the people's return to the Promised Land was made possible by what transpired in this place where Yahowah is introduced and the Torah is revealed. Most especially, it was in Midden that we were first introduced to Yahowah. And so, perhaps in light of the reference to this place in advance of the prophecy, Yehudim will be reintroduced to the realization that their God has a name. Now, Moses was shepherding the flock of Ithro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midden. And he guided his flock to that which comes after the wilderness, and he came to Choreb, the mountain of God. Shemoth/Exodus 3 verse 1, Then the Malachite messenger of Yahowah was seen, appearing to him in a blazing fire from the midst of the protruding precipice. He looked and beheld the sharp crag was ablaze and burning, and yet the peak was not consumed. Shemoth/Exodus 3 verse 2. Moses said, I would prefer to go in a different direction, changing my approach because I want to inspect and understand this empowering and enormously important sight, contemplating the incombustible nature of the sharp rocky crag. Shemoth/Exodus 3 verse 3. When Yahowah saw that he had turned to inspect what he had seen, God called out to him, offering him a welcoming invitation to meet from the midst of the sharp rocky crag, saying, Moses, Moses. So, he said, Behold, it's me. Shemoth/Exodus 3 verse 4. Then he said, Do not come near this place. If you wouldn't mind, detach your sandals from upon your feet because, indeed, this site which you are presently standing upon is set apart in very special ground. Shemoth/Exodus 3 verse 5, Then he said, I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Yitzchak, and the God of Jacob. However, Moses concealed his presence because he was too awestruck to look at God. Shemoth/Exodus 3 verse 6. Yahowah said, I have seen the affliction and harassment of my people who are in the crucibles of political and religious oppression in Mitzrayim. I have heard their distressing cry on account of their exploitation and oppression. Indeed, I am aware of their suffering. Shemoth/Exodus 3 verse 7. Therefore, I have descended, coming down from a much higher place, to deliver them from the influence of the subjugating tyrants in Mitzrayim, and to lift them up out of that country, taking them to a good and pleasing, beneficial and spacious realm, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanite. Shemoth/Exodus 3 verse 8. So, behold, the wailing cry of despair from the children of Yisrael has come to me. I have seen the starvation rations and oppressive conditions with which the political and religious despots in Mitzrayim are imprisoning them. Shemoth/Exodus 3 verse 9, As a result, let's go because I want to extend myself through you to Pharaoh, so that you may bring my people, the children of Yisrael, out of this highly questionable affliction and oppression in Mitzrayim. Shemoth/Exodus 3 verse 10. Our reintroduction to Yahowah through Midden is relevant because it demonstrates how desirous God is to remove his people from the caustic and controlling, the degrading and incapacitating influence of human governance and institutionalized religion, as well as the stratified and oppressive nature of caste systems and slavery. Further, God's approach is contrary to what men would do. He didn't deploy an army, didn't dispatch a navy, didn't send in his vast array of heavenly envoys, didn't deploy diplomats to negotiate a treaty, didn't impose economic sanctions or offer monetary incentives to those he knew coveted them. He didn't even engage a popular, articulate, or prestigious individual but, instead, solicited the help of a senior citizen with a scandalous reputation to liberate his children from religious and governmental influences in the most powerful nation on earth. Today, his people are not slaves. His testimony is readily available. No plagues, miracles, or dramatic showdowns are required. There is no need to endure 40 years herding hundreds of thousands of bickering children through the desert. However, time is growing short. Since God's plan and guidance have already been revealed, all we have to do is take what he conveyed seriously. Nothing needs to be added, just translated and explained. Yahowah hasn't changed nor has his message. And the tools at our disposal are infinitely superior to what they were 3,000 years ago. Therefore, since Yahowah accomplished a more difficult challenge in a world without modern communication systems or rapid transportation, working with a muttering old guy on the lam, why would anyone think that Yah would need more than one old gowy to rekindle his fire in his people? We turn to this section of Shemoth/names in search of understanding the Midden Midian reference in Yashayah 9:5. Little did we expect that it would shed some interesting light on how God goes about choosing those who serve his children. But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and come out with the children of Israel, bringing them out of religious and political oppression in Mitzrayim?" Shemoth 3:11. So, he said, "Because I will be with you. This is the sign and proof that I have sent you, by you having brought out the family from Mitzrayim the crucibles of affliction and oppression, you will work with God upon this mountain." Shemoth/Exodus 3 verse 12. This mountain where the Torah was revealed is in Midden Midian. Every word of this speaks to us because it is all relevant today. Yahowah obviously wanted to work with someone who knew the Egyptians and who was opposed to their politics, religion, military, and economic system. Having experienced these things and having left them because he disliked them are the reasons Moses was chosen. This also spared God the ordeal of having to explain why he was so opposed to that which had subjugated and abused his people, as Roman Catholics and Muslims have done and now progressives are doing. And I suspect that it humored the Almighty to communicate his name and word through an individual with questionable diction. Having left corporate management, religion, patriotism, and politics, I can picture myself in Moses' situation. I understand Yahowah's aversion to these things. His position resonates with me as I'm sure it did with Moses. And while I wasn't afforded the opportunity to climb the desolate crags of Choreb, there wasn't any reason to do so, not now that we find Yahowah ready and willing to talk to us through the words of the Torah revealed upon this mountain. And while it was an individual calling, Moses would not work alone. Aharon would join him as would others. In my case, it was Joe, then Jeff and James, now Jackie, David, Kirk, Mike, Molly, Todd, JK, Dee, Leah, and so many others. This is why we find Midden along the path home. Then Moses, the one who draws us away from human oppression, said to God, "Now look, if I go to the children of Israel, and I say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name, what shall I say to them?" Shemoth 3:13. God responded to Moses, "I am Ehiah, who, Asher, I am Ehiah. Then he said, "This is what you should say to the children of Israel, I exist has sent me to you." Shemoth 3:14. In addition, God said to Moses, "This is what you should actually and continually say to the children of Israel, Yahowah, the God of your fathers, God of Abraham, God of Yitzchak, and God of Jacob, sent me to you. This is my name forever, throughout all time. And this is my way of being known and remembered regarding all places, eras, and generations." Shemoth/names/Exodus 3 verse 15. Moses' mission would include introducing Yahowah by name to his people, liberating the children of Israel from religious and political oppression, listening to God and then sharing what he had learned verbally and in writing. Our mission today is to reintroduce Yahowah to his people, encouraging Yisraelites to flee religious and political oppression by translating what God conveyed through his prophets and sharing what we have learned verbally and in writing. While Moses' experience with Yahowah is more than enough to inspire the reference to Midden in Yashayah 9:5, it was not the last. With the first portraying all that was possible, the next reveals what would be impossible without God. For then Yahowah spoke to Moses, saying, "Take an adversarial position in quarantine, confining the Midianites the contentious and disable them, Bamidbar 25:17, for they have been adversaries of yours, harassing and confining you with their cunning deceptions and subtle duplicity, with which they have defrauded you, having conspired to deliberately cheat you, stealing what is rightfully yours with the message of power the open and broad path where the Lord Baal is worshipped as light. And as a result of the statements of Cosby my vain and disappointing deception, the daughter of the leader of Midian the contentious. Their sister was the one slain in the day of the pandemic plague on account of the words spoken at power the open and broad path where the Lord Baal is worshipped." Bamidbar/Numbers 25:18. The Midianites would endure the consequence of promoting their religion in proximity to the children of Israel. And since God does not change, we can be assured that the same fate awaits Christians, Muslims, and the Haredim for having practiced and promoted their religions in Israel. Through it all, many Yisraelites will succumb and die, but there will be those who reject the Lord and who will be spared. Called back into the promised land and the covenant, they will come to share Yahowah's aversion to religion. It is in this context, on Sukkah/camping out, in year 6000 Yah, as the sun sets in Yerushalayim on Friday, October 7th, a Shabat, after the dust has settled from all traces of religion, politics, and with their militaries eliminated, when the earth has been restored to the conditions experienced in Eden, that we find that Dowd's seat of honor and kingdom are restored, forever, a declaration which is astonishing in and of itself. And prior to this, we are told that this sun has been placed before us to show us the way, providing the most wonderful counsel. Our work together has led us to the precipice of what Yashayah is about to reveal, to the same mountain and then on to the promised land. We learn that there is someone who is more important to our well-being and to our approach to God than Moses. The most relevant insights into the relationship come from Yahowah's beloved son, his Messiah and King, the prophet who would shepherd and defend God's people. A Yahud was chosen to write the songs which will be sung in heaven. For the past 2,000 years, the world has been wrong about Yashayah 9:6-7, even though it is among the most quoted of all prophecies. It is not predictive of the mythical misnomer, Jesus Christ, but descriptive of Dowd, more commonly known as King David. Based on what is said about him, the implications could not be greater. Rather than following a figment of man's imagination, the world ought to have been listening to Dowd. Rather than predict the ludicrous notion of the birth of God, rather than justify a Gentile religion, rather than describe the misnomer, Jesus, rather than validate a New Testament, Isaiah 9 verses 6 to 7 obliterates everything Christians believe. We can learn far more from Dowd than from anyone else. And this has always been Yahowah's intent. It is why we possess so much of what Dowd wrote, all in the original language, all marvelously preserved, all easily verified. There were more psalm scrolls found in the caves above the Dead Sea than any other. And yet, with the reincarnation of Dionysus, we have nothing in Hebrew, and nothing but hearsay coming to us by way of translations so carelessly composed and conveyed that nothing is credible. Yahowah's prophecy affirms that Dowd was the most brilliant, articulate and insightful man who ever lived. As the Son of God, the Messiah, and King, as the Passover Lamb and Savior, he will be returning with Yahowah to shepherd his flock throughout space and time. Yahowah's inspired revelation discredits the notion that Jesus Christ was the Son of God, the Messiah, a King, and a Savior. God was not born, he did not die, and there will be no second coming of Christ. Before we rejoin the prophecy, there are some things we ought to understand. Yahowah/Isaiah 9 verse 6 and 9:7 telescope time in traditional Hebrew fashion, presenting both past and future events. Its depictions play out over a period of 3,000 years. And since the past, present, and future are seen as one integrated whole from God's perspective, Yahowah 9:6 and 9:7 should never have been broken apart and presented as two distinct thoughts. Therefore, in the transition from Hebrew to English, a translator must choose the tense which most accurately reflects the timeframe being discussed. In this regard, we must pay especially close attention to the conjugations which speak of things that are either completed during a period of time or open-ended and continuous. Also, in the Hebrew language, adjectives and adverbs follow their respective nouns and verbs. But since English grammar uses the opposite approach, the translation needs to reflect this arrangement to be accurate. For example, just because it is Ruach Kodesh in Hebrew, does not mean that we should write Spirit set apart in our translations. As it relates to the following, Yahowah wrote, Counselor who is brilliant and insightful, not wonderful, Counselor. Similarly, the prophet spoke of a valiant and heroic defender of God, not Almighty God. Further, he said that he would be an eternal witness providing enduring testimony for the Father, rather than applying the title Everlasting Father. Additionally, Shem is more than a name in that it also conveys an individual's renown and reputation. I share this because there is only one actual name among the 7 historic and 7 prophetic portrayals of this individual's nature and value. And that is Dowd. Therefore, what follows is a profoundly different and yet more accurate presentation of Yahowah 9:6 and 9:7 than any you have seen before. The opening stanza may be the most memorable ever spoken. For indeed, because truly, emphasizing this statement while revealing an important contrast, a child, Yeld, a boy, the male offspring of parents, an infant who grows up to become a young man, a descendant, from Yalad, is brought forth, was born, Yalad, was conceived and brought into view through a woman impregnated by the father of the child, Puel perfect passive, before us, La, Anaknu, for in among us, a son, Ben, a male descendant, the masculine offspring of a mother and father, was provided and placed, Nathan, was given and produced at a point in time, appointed and bestowed, brought and devoted, Nifel perfect passive, concerning us, La, Anaknu, on our behalf, regarding our approach. The opportunity to learn what can be known about how to engage and endure in addition to the government, Wa Misra, the dominion and sovereignty to lead, from I, to ponder the implications of Sarah, having the power to exert oneself, to contend, to persist, and to persevere, was and will be, Wa Haya, has been, continues to be, and will actually exist with ongoing implications, Kal imperfect active, literally with unfolding consequences over time, on, Al, upon, his shoulder, Shechem. Who, his back based upon a continued succession of events transpiring upon his ridgeline and predicated upon the eagerness in which he pursued his calling early in his life. His reputation and renown, Washem who, his personal and proper designation and name, has been read and recited as, Kara, was for a time invited and summoned as, called out and welcomed as, met with and proclaimed as, even may be read aloud and announced as, Cal Perfect, from 1QSA, a counselor providing valuable advice, YYV2C10, one who offers direction and thought-provoking guidance to deliberate, an analyst who proposes and reveals the purpose of the plan, a mentor who speaks out and urges those who listen to follow his guidance and thinking because it is thoughtful and reasonable, who is astoundingly brilliant and amazingly insightful, Pele, who is marvelous, wonderful, and distinguished, surpassing all others, set apart and separating, influential and fantastic, as well as prophetic, a valiant and heroic individual with a prominent military and political standing in the community, the most courageous and capable man, Gibor. A powerful person who prevails, a mighty warrior, brave and strong soldier, a capable and proven defender, a champion confirming the influence and strengthening nature of God, El, of the Almighty, an eternal witness providing restoring testimony, Ed, an observant and meticulous individual providing everlasting evidence from long ago, sharing proof which is re-establishing, an eyewitness back in time conveying and memorializing information regarding the perpetual and continued existence, for the father, of the progenitor, originator and male caregiver and provider, the leader who conveys the authorized position, Hasar, the ruler of the government. Who acts and delivers, who has the authority and power to prevail with regard to representing the official stance on, from 1QSA, on reconciliation and restoration leading to salvation, Shalom, on the blessings of restitution and redemption, on peace and prosperity, on satisfaction and favoritism, on association and friendship, regarding health and prosperity, on safety and being complete, regarding lacking nothing, on contentment, tranquility, and companionship in the relationship. Yahowah. Isaiah 9 verse 6, tremendously increasing, abundantly, greatly, and extensively, plentifully and totally, to the largest extent possible on the scale of spatial dimensions, amplifying and growing, the ability to learn about and respond to, providing the information and imparting the instruction learned as a student, teaching how to become familiar with the guidance needed to accept, diligently studying and then explaining the pattern and plan, as a student eager to learn is taught by another, having received clear and compelling revelations so as to be prepared to intelligently convey, contracted from Lamed, to teach and learn, gaining information through instruction and then responding appropriately to, the means to engage and endure, to be liberated and empowered, ha-misra. The person being written about choosing to understand by questioning the who, what, where, why, when, and how of that which pertains to persisting and persevering, of being set free and being empowered, a compound of to probe and question Sarah, the means to engage and endure, to contend, to be liberated, and to be empowered. As a result of this approach, then adding these things together, collectively, therefore and accordingly, facilitating this direction, reconciliation and restoration, complete satisfaction and total contentment, shalom, the blessings of an entirely favorable circumstance leading to overwhelming prosperity, friendship and affection, tranquility and companionship, safety and salvation from harm's way, as well as deliverance, resulting in a free, healthy, and satisfying relationship. Will be without end, ein ketz, will never cease or be negated, and are unbounded and limitless, without constraint, upon the throne, al-Kais, before the seat of honor in association with the high status of the dignified and empowering garment, the source of power adorning and covering the royal authority, of Dowd, the beloved, as well as, in addition, upon his kingdom through his considered advice and counsel, al-Mamlakahu. As a result of his sovereign authority and reign over his realm, and on account of his thoughtful guidance and assistance, from Malik, to reign by providing considered and intelligent advice and instruction, directions and counsel, so as to be prepared and established by it, lakun, high, authenticated and authorized by it, to be prepared and become steadfast, ready and supported through it, deciding and concluding to approach regarding it, hyphal infinitive construct, whereby the object is engaged by the subject, becoming akin to a secondary subject irrespective of time or place, in the feminine singular and thus addressing Mamlaka, and, to be restored and sustained by him, Sayadhu, to be renewed and upheld through him, to be strengthened and supported by it, and to make it safe and secure, refreshing it with the most favorable and nourishing sustenance, it is masculine in 1 QSA and thus refers to Dowd or to his Kai's seat of honor versus feminine in the MT, addressing the kingdom, with the means to exercise good judgment and justly resolve disputes, BA Mishpat. As part of a plan to decide, as a prescription based upon an official proclamation depicting how the judge will determine each case, remaining completely fair and yet consistent, from to ponder the implications of Shabat, deciding, judging, being discriminating, and resolving controversies, by, ba, also with, being right, tzedakah, being correct, fair, and just, acquitting and vindicating, honest and blameless, innocent and in full accord with the standard, from then to now, min, ada, beginning congruent with the events being depicted, right now and thus coinciding with this narration, simultaneous with this rational declaration, and forevermore, ad aulam. Throughout all time, eternally. The deep devotion and passion, china, the zeal and fervor for exclusivity, strong desire to accomplish something special, and ardent love and jealousy, of Yahowah, an accurate transliteration of the name of Eloah God guided by his Torah instructions regarding his higher existence and our shalom reconciliation, of the vast array of spiritual implements, Saba, of the host of heavenly messengers and envoys, has consistently engaged to make this happen, Asa Zoth has caused this to continuously occur, having always done what was required, such that he will act accordingly to accomplish this, fashioning this result, continuing to perform in this way, Kal imperfect active with this as feminine, meaning Yahowah is actually engaging such that we can be continuously right. Yashayah/Isaiah 9 verse 7. At the time of this writing, circa 740 BCE, the declaration, a child was born before us, would naturally have pertained to Dowd David. He was not only conceived and born in the normal fashion, in the perfect conjugation, his birth is presented as a completed action, occurring in the past. When considering the statement, a son was provided concerning us, we should turn our attention to the one man deserving of Yahowah's remarkable statement, I am his father and he is my son. Yahowah placed the governance of Yisrael on Dowd's shoulder. He chose him to shepherd his people, anointed him Mashyach to demonstrate his authorization, and then appointed him Melech. Further, in this case, the verb, haya, was scribed in the imperfect, indicating that what had been done would continue throughout time. Dowd is not only the obvious and most qualified individual, he is the only man who once was and again will be king. Those who have closely examined his Mizmor know that Dowd is the counselor providing valuable advice who is astoundingly brilliant and amazingly insightful. This is the shepherd's and prophet's role, the one who wrote the Mizmor and Mashal. When it comes to providing brilliant advice, thought-provoking guidance, and valuable insights, Dowd is in a class by himself. Gibor does not mean Almighty, and thus his name was not Almighty God, as Christians want the faithful to believe. This deception should be enough to make the rational reject religion. Even when considering all of the mythos associated with his caricature, Jesus was never presented as a Gibor, a valiant and heroic individual with a prominent military and political standing in the community who was devoted to defending God's people. Dowd was, however, the most courageous and capable man of God. It began with the defeat of a rather large Philistine and will continue with the eradication of antagonistic Gentiles. Jews understand the implications of this prophecy, making it obvious for them why they could not accept Jesus as the Messiah, much less as the fulfillment of this proclamation. Unlike Dowd, who wrote vociferously about the mishpat way to resolve disputes and achieve shalom reconciliation, the mythical Jesus didn't have much to say about the means Yahowah provided to fulfill the covenant's promises. By contrast, Dowd explained exactly what he would endure to save his people, doing so 1,000 years in advance of it occurring. He became an eternal witness providing restoring testimony on behalf of the Father. That said, no man is the eternal Father, making the Christian translation highly suspect. At issue is Ed, whose primary definition reads just as I have rendered it, an eternal witness providing restoring testimony. Ed speaks of an observant and thorough individual providing everlasting evidence from long ago. And Ed shares proof which is restoring. He is an eyewitness back in time conveying and memorializing information regarding the perpetual and continued existence of God. In all of human history, no leader was as authorized by God as Dowd. He was specifically chosen, anointed 3 times, and appointed king, not once but twice. He is afforded every title and depiction of consequence, from Ben to Bikur, from Mashyach to Melech, from Ra to Zeroah, called Jibor to Tzadak, and is even depicted as the branch, a prophet, and the hand of God. It is hard to miss the connection between Dowd and Shalom. His son, the last king to rule over a unified Yisrael, was even named Shalomo Solomon, which is a variation of Shalom. And not only is Dowd's redemption assured because he was right, but because he also facilitated the means to reconciliation leading to salvation by fulfilling the YYV2C10. It is fair to say that Dowd epitomized Shalom. By serving as the Passover lamb, Dowd opened the door to life. With his soul fulfilling unyeasted bread, Dowd perfected his people by carrying their guilt into Sheol and depositing it there. As Yahowah's firstborn, Dowd was restored into fellowship with his father on firstborn children. And for having done so, Dowd was enriched and empowered during the promise of 7. This is why we herald his return during trumpets, knowing that Dowd will provide Shalom during the day of reconciliation. Having made Shalom with God, Dowd's seat of authority will endure forever during the eternal celebration of shelters as the covenant family camps out with Yahowah in perfect Shalom. As a result, those who listen and respond to Dowd's songs are Shalom, reconciled and satisfied, Ein Ketz, beyond limitation. We are Kun, prepared and established, Saad, restored and sustained, Ba Mishpat, having exercised good judgment about the means to justly resolve the disputes which would otherwise separate us from Yah. And this is because Dowd was tzedakah, right regarding Yahowah, so our relationship will endure min ada, from then to now, wa ad aulam, and forevermore. This prophetic portrayal concludes with Yahowah acknowledging that he, Asa, personally and consistently engaged throughout time to make this happen because of his china, deep devotion and passion, his strong desire to accomplish something special as a result of his love for Dowd, the beloved. Considering that it was Yah's china, fervor for exclusivity and ardent love, which lies at the heart of his relationship with his son. In stark contrast, when Jews discounted his sacrifice and Christians transferred these promises to create Jesus Christ, it enraged his father. He will never forgive those who are guilty of this offense. When it comes to our relationship with Yahowah, the realization that Dowd David was right regarding God, the realization that his testimony was correct as it pertains to God, the realization that he represents everything that is important to God, comprise the most empowering, enriching, enlightening, and liberating conclusion we are asked to draw from the Word of God. Dowd David is the lone candidate fulfilling each aspect of this prophetic statement. And, to unquestionably confirm the obvious, he is named at the conclusion of the prophecy. All of us at times forget a name or address someone by the wrong name, but we never do so with our own children. There is no possibility that God asked his prophet to write Dowd David if he meant to say Jesus. So now this question, how can this promise be of any value to the religious if the basis of their belief relies on altering the words Yahowah spoke? How can it be seen as affirming their religion when they must turn the God who inspired this prophecy into a liar who would renounce his son? May I ask anyone still lost in religion, if this was about baby Jesus, why did Yahowah dispatch this statement to Yisrael, to the very people the Christian Jesus allegedly rejected? If we are to believe that this was about Christianity, why was the gift allotted to Jews? Yahowah, Yahowah, an accurate transliteration of the name of Eloah, God as guided by his Torah, teaching regarding his Haya, existence and our Shalom, restoration, dispatched, Shalak, reached out by sending out, Kal perfect, the word, Daber, the message and statement, this account and promise, unto, Ba, among and within, with regard to because of his association with, Yaakov, Yitzchak's son, the father of Yisrael, to dig in his heels and impact his brother as a result of the consequence of his footsteps, and so, it has been allotted to, Naphal, it has fallen upon and been distributed among, Yisrael, individuals who engage and endure with God, from YSH Sarah L. Yashayah / liberation and salvation are from Yah / Isaiah 9 verse 8. I feel sorry for father and son. This prophecy is such a wonderful gift to all of us, and yet for thousands of years, it has been used to validate a hateful religion while besmirching a loving relationship. Yada Yahowah.